Once upon a time, the F-4E Phantom was one of my favorite jets to play in all of War Thunder. This thing used to be the top tier jet for the US tech tree. And while it kinda did get pushed away from the meta as we got the introduction of Pulse Doppler superior flight performance jets such as the EJ Kai, the Biggin, and of course the MiG-23 MLD, there was a time where this plane's average matchmaker consisted of, at best, the MiG-21 BIS and a lot of MiG-21 MFs, SMTs, Mirage 3s, J-35Ds, and the MiG-23M. Combine that with the fact that every single weapon on this aircraft used to be way better. I'm talking about how the Vulcan used to be a laser beam, easily capable of getting 1 kilometer shots. The AIM-9J was arguably better than the R60. It pulled a lot harder, it was more flare resistant, and it had more range, of course, than it does now. And you had AIM-7Es, which are not great missiles, but compared to what everything else was rocking, which was pretty much R3Rs at best for most of the F4E's top tier life, it had a pretty obvious advantage. And then, of course, even AIM-7E2s came out, and the next best thing was the R-24R. That was the only peer-to-peer missile with the AIM-7E2, and that's pretty much what everybody else had, and you had 4 of them. The flight performance has always been a phantom. It's never been the best at a dogfight or the best in a 1 versus 1 situation, but in a top tier ARB game, this thing definitely had the tools that it could bring to the table to actually be a very competitive plane in the top tier matchmaker. How is this in 2024? Well, honestly, after I've played it, I kind of think it's completely miserable. And I can't even imagine how painful this jet would be to grind from stock. So if you need any help with your stock grind, check out today's video sponsor, GE for War Thunder. GE for War Thunder is an app available on the Google Play Store in which you will complete tasks of varying difficulty to earn yourself Golden Eagles. The harder the task, the more GE you get, the easier the task, the less GE you get. I recommend doing some of the easier tasks, get a small amount of Golden Eagles, and just get yourself a quick little day of premium time for a little bit of grinding. Click the link in the description down below and use my code on screen for 10 extra Golden Eagles. Even if you're playing a fully spaded F4E though, I can't help but just feel like I'd be playing a couple of other different aircraft at 11.0 than the F4E. Back in the day, you could get by not having Pulse Doppler. It wasn't the end of the world. However, in 2024, where the meta is absolutely just hug the deck at all times to avoid the SAR missiles, well, having Pulse Doppler is kind of required because this radar does not work at low altitude. Granted, as far as non-Pulse Doppler radars go, it's actually still probably on the better end, but again, it's just kind of a requirement anymore that you have Pulse Doppler if you're going to be using radar missiles in any capacity when your opponents are things like AIM-7 M&Fs, R-24Rs, which by the way, overall the R-24R has pretty much obviously become better than the AIM-7E. Back in the day, it was kind of a toss-up. It's a matter of personal preference. The AIM-7E was better at close range, the R-24R was better at far range. But through a series of buffs since then, there's pretty much no reason you'd really want the AIM-7Es or the E2s over the R-24R. So if you can't really rely on your radar missiles, which used to be kind of a big plus to this plane, it was one of the only aircraft that had a good set of radar missiles. Well, how about the IR missiles? Well, the AIM-9J has certainly seen better days. It does have a bigger field of view seeker now, so you can give it more lead. That's a plus, but pretty much everything else about the missile has been nerfed, and that's not so much of a plus. It is an extremely short-range missile now compared to what you're used to seeing in top tier with things like AIM-9Gs, Hs, Ls, and you even have the Python 3 and the PL5 in the mix. It's just not the easiest IR missile to actually get kills with, just because of its range alone. But aside from that, its maneuverability has been quite nerfed as well. It used to be 20G missile, the AIM-9G for example was 18G missile on the stat card, while the AIM-9G actually pulls better than the AIM-9J does now. And that is despite the stat card still saying that the AIM-9J can pull 20 optimal G versus the G's 18 optimal G, which is just further proof to not really pay that much attention to what the max overload is on the stat card as far as comparing similar numbered missiles. Obviously, something's like 10G versus 20. It's pretty likely that the 20 is almost always going to be more maneuverable, but you kind of get the point. So overall, I would certainly rather have quite a few other missiles than AIM-9Js at 11.0. There are 11.0 missiles that are just obviously better. I've mentioned a few already. and that leaves the Phantom in a tough spot. Well, how about its lovely, trusty Vulcan? The Vulcan's not nearly as lovely and trusty as it used to be. The range, due to the bullet drag changes, as well as the damage, has been nerfed. It's not quite the laser beam of death that it used to be. Still an extremely good gun, don't get me wrong, but the Vulcan used to be something, in my opinion, where it was like, that's a big plus of the vehicle. If it did have a Vulcan, it really makes getting gun kills significantly easier, whereas nowadays, it's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to pick one plane over another just because one's lacking a Vulcan. So what you're left with is a plane where it's completely been declawed, really, as far as its offensive weaponry goes. So what about its flight performance? Well, as I said in the beginning of the video, it's really never been the greatest dogfighter, and that's especially true today. This thing is pretty much the worst dogfighter at the tier. The best plane you're going to be able to go against in a 1v1 for yourself is probably going to be something like a Tornado. Everything else, you're pretty much fighting an uphill battle as far as a dogfight goes. And that's just as far as dogfighting goes. How about survivability? Well, it's not exactly the fastest plane. It doesn't hold its energy the best, especially because of those slats. You do have to be extremely careful not to get slow, which is not that difficult to do in the Phantom, the F4E specifically. And if you do get slow, you pretty much have no low speed maneuverability. Well, it's a good thing that we're playing top tier ARB, where everyone's going for kills in the form of missiles, and you can just one key defend yourself using flares, right? Well, not exactly, because even the flares are a little bit annoying to use sometimes. I started out playing the Phantom running mixed countermeasures, which really shouldn't be that big of a deal. The problem is that flare rise time has made the F4E significantly more difficult to flare missiles with, because the flares aren't as hot as they used to be. They take a little bit longer to warm up, and the Phantom, as it always had an issue with, is very hot. IR missiles really like tracking your engines, and you will have a difficult time flaring missiles very often from 6 o'clock if you're just running a mixed loadout of countermeasures. So I actually ended up switching to just flare priority toward the end of my playthrough, because that's what I found that I needed to actually be able to flare some of these missiles, at least reliably anyways, without losing too much airspeed in the process. Doing it with one missile, not as big of a deal, but if you're going for a second or a third, you have to put a lot of effort into the maneuvering to get those missiles away from your plane and track your flares, and it's just going to end up making you lose a lot of speed in the process. Last thing I want to touch on real quick is the minimum fuel F4E used to be something that everyone really hyped up, and it was something worth hyping up, at least was something worth noting, that the F4E on minimum fuel was actually somewhat competitive in dogfights versus even some of the better aircraft at top tier. Nowadays, with even the fuel slider, you would think that would be a big help, considering its low speed performance, or low fuel performance, excuse me. And you would be right, you can get to low fuel performance quicker, but it doesn't mean that much anymore. All of the planes you're fighting at this battle rating are pretty much just straight up better than you, even when you're on low fuel. Sure, the low fuel is going to make you a little bit better. It's going to give you a better edge when you do actually need the performance, but it's still not going to make you better than them in that situation. And so I guess the overall point of this video has been the F4E Phantom has kind of just been left behind, and it's kind of a shame. I did really enjoy this plane. I'm probably not really going to play it ever again, at least for the foreseeable future, until maybe there's some BR changes, but as of right now, I did not enjoy this aircraft. I don't think most of you would probably enjoy the aircraft. I'd much rather have recommended something like the F4J. It has pulse Doppler, it's got the AIM-7s, it's got better IR missiles in the form of AIM-9Gs, and I think, it doesn't have HMD, but if you buy the F4S, that has HMD, I'm positive. In all of this, for only a 0.3 battle rating increase, I think it is well worth it, because your matchmaker is going to be pretty much the same regardless. In fact, I'm telling you right now, 10.0 games do not exist as an 11.0 plane. I have never gotten one in the past like 3 months I've played. I don't know if it's just me, maybe it's just extremely bad luck, but I really challenge anybody to play an 11.0 and end up in a 10.0 match. It's pretty much always going to be a 10.3 minimum with F5Cs on your team and whatnot. And that's the other thing, man. Your matchmaker with your team is terrible because you're full of premium teammates, which certainly is not going to help your win rate. And this is just something I want to do. I haven't talked about the F4E in a long time. I know some of you original subscribers do probably remember how much I enjoyed this plane, so I wanted to give you a current opinion on it. and obviously it's not a very high opinion, and I don't really recommend you play it. This is the best footage of this plane I could get before I just lost my marbles and said the hell with it. I'm not going to get any high kill games for your guys' entertainment because I genuinely just am incapable of doing so, which I recognize is partly a skill issue, but I think it's just largely because the F4E is not as capable as it used to be. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you find something more fun to play that maybe isn't even War Thunder, and I'll see you later.